Were we wrong about Godfather 3 for the last 35 years? Welcome to Screen Slice, where we talk about a movie and try to find the best pizza to have with our movie. I've always liked Godfather 3, and I know that's kind of an unpopular opinion. I wanted to talk about that movie today and talk a little bit about the influence and a lot of things that they're kind of random thoughts, but I think they all come together in the end in terms of just the general theme about whether or not all the hatred toward the movie is deserved, or if there's actually some merit to this as a legitimate film in the series of The Godfather and in general in cinema history. And I think the biggest problem is people went into the movie kind of expecting something like Godfather 1 or 2. And the reason why I say that is because it's really not anything like 1 or 2. You have to kind of take a step back. Godfather 1, there's a famous story about Francis Ford Coppola trying to make this movie and there's a whole book about it, and I think they've even made a television show about it on Paramount. There were just so many things that came together. You know, he wanted certain actors, the studio wanted certain actors, and nobody could get on the same page. In the end, they wanted him to cut a whole bunch of it. He made the cut for them, and then they said the movie made no sense, so then he put it all back in. There's a lot of lore that goes into the original Godfather. When it was a giant success, they wanted to follow it up with Godfather Part II. Godfather Part II was a little bit more of an art film in terms of Francis Ford Coppola's vision. It had a little bit less of the studio influence. He got to explore that kind of dual storyline, kind of the two bosses at the same time in their life, and show kind of what was happening with Vito as a young Vito and Michael as coming into power, trying to move away from the New York City mobster thing into the more legitimate Vegas mobster thing. So fast forward a bunch of years later, and they decide, you know what, we have to go back, cash in on the sequel business, because sequels were a big thing at that point. They were talking about Back to the Future 2 and 3 when they were doing that. So it was enticing for them to redevelop Godfather 3, which they had talked about multiple times throughout the 70s and 80s. So they finally got to making Godfather 3. And this is kind of where there's a very different vibe to Godfather 3 than there was to 1 and 2. I think the biggest issue with 3 is that for 1 and 2, they did a really good job transporting you into the time period where the movie was supposed to be happening. When it comes to Godfather 3, it's very difficult based on the settings and everything in the movie to determine what time period that takes place in. I think that part of it actually makes it difficult to relate to because it doesn't feel like continuation of the characters from the 1940s and 50s from Godfather 1 and 2. It feels like we've jumped forward a lot of years into the late 1970s, and I don't think that's actually true. I think a lot of the events that happen in Godfather 3 correlate with some of the things that were happening where a pope passed away and that type of stuff. But I feel like, and I can go look this up, I just don't want to, there's a definite mismatch in terms of the expectation and the setting of the movie. But there's a bigger thing that actually is different about Godfather 3. It's very clearly influenced by Godfather 1 and 2. Whereas Godfather 1 and 2, they were creating a style and going off of that. I would say if you're going to go into Godfather 3, don't think of it as a continuation of the characters. And we're going to get back to this point too, because there was a re-release of the movie that recently happened, recently as in 5 years ago, that I think validates my point a little bit. But what you need to look at Godfather 3 is as a pastiche of Godfather 1 and 2. Now, I had to get the definition of the word just so that we can actually talk about it in context here. Pastiche is an artistic work, literature, music, art, film, that imitates the style of another artist, work, or period, often blending multiple styles into one creation, serving as a tribute rather than mockery, unlike parody. So where I think this is actually relevant is I don't see this movie as Francis Ford Coppola generating a new vision. I see this as him paying tribute to his original vision of the Corleone family. And to that effect, there's a lot about this movie that has a very postmodern influence. And I'm talking postmodern, kind of pre-Quentin Tarantino, because Quentin Tarantino is the poster boy for postmodern, where everything he kind of steals from other movies. Where here, it seems like for Godfather 3, Francis Ford Coppola went back to the well and kind of took whatever worked from 1 and 2 and incorporated it into 3 in a way that was kind of bordering between tribute and parody, I would say. And that's kind of where I use the word pastiche, because I think it's very relevant here. So there's that whole postmodern influence, and where I think the biggest thing for this is, if you look at the characterization of Michael, it doesn't even feel like the same character from the first 2 movies. It almost feels like that character is aware of the previous character, and they do a lot of work to separate Michael from the previous person that he was. But as with the theme in the movie and what he says in the movie, just when I thought I was out, they pull me back in. There's that struggle. And I think part of that is also in the overall release of the movie and the overall reception of the movie. I think people didn't want to let go of the fact that this wasn't a continuation and was a little bit more of a period at the end of the sentence. Let's talk about the re-release of the movie, and I have it right here. He renamed Godfather 3, Godfather Coda, The Death of Michael Corleone. So in this re-release that happened in 2020, Francis Ford Coppola went back and he re-edited the movie, kind of reorganizing a little bit of the story, because I think a lot of the plot with the Vatican gets a little bit convoluted in the original cut of the movie, and they simplify it a little. They move some stuff around and they change the ending, and I want to dedicate an entire section of this video to the ending. And we'll hit on it a couple of times here because it's kind of ridiculous. It kind of speaks to the point of the movie in terms of how we're supposed to feel about the characters. This was supposed to be a look back into the Corleone family after the events of Godfather II. Godfather II, in my opinion, was like the original Empire Strikes Back. It was a downer of a movie. At the end of the movie, Michael kills his brother, and it's supposed to be a very heartfelt moment, and you're supposed to really have seen Michael kind of transform into this really heartless, kind of doesn't even care about family anymore. And that was kind of the ending there. Godfather 3 is supposed to be the redemption of Michael Corleone. But like we talked about, just when I thought I was out, they pull me back in. The way the movie originally ended, do I want to hit this here? No, I don't. We're going to talk about the ending a little bit later after we talk about some of the characters and the things that happened in the movie. And we're going to talk about pizza in a second because I got something really cool here that I want to actually relate to the film. But in Coda, The Death of Michael Corleone, it kind of shows that Michael Corleone had already died, essentially. And it shows the events of the final metamorphosis of the character. Again, for this, I think we're going to have to get back to the ending, and I don't want to talk about it right now because I have something kind of significant I want to talk about there. The movie takes us back to Sicily. The plot is kind of convoluted and goes into Michael wanting to support his son, becoming an opera singer, and they go to the opera in Sicily, where it's Cavalleria Rustica. That's kind of the big event at the end of the movie that's supposed to mirror what happens in the other two movies. So they go back to Sicily. So I figured for this, let's get a Sicilian pizza. This pizza is from a place called Prima Pizza here in Schenectady, New York. It's one of my neighborhood pizza places, but I thought it was a very fitting thing to have with The Godfather 3 was a Sicilian pizza. Not only because of the ties to Sicily and the fact that the Corleones are Sicilian, but also they go to Sicily. And the way the movie ends at the end of Coda, The Death of Michael Corleone, there's a definite nod to Sicily where they say, in Sicilian, cent'anni means for 100 years, or whatever it says. I'll put it up on the screen if I could find a picture of it. And a Sicilian never forgets. For a long life is what it says. Cent'anni actually means 100 years. For a long life, essentially what you were supposed to be seeing is, after the death of Michael's daughter, Michael actually went on to live a very long life in Sicily and got to suffer with all of the things that happened over the course of the films and over the course of his life. Really weighed on him after his daughter's death. But the Sicilian part of it is, when I saw the ending of Coda, The Death of Michael Corleone, I thought it was kind of silly the way that they put that, but I kind of get it. Sicilian never forgets. It's more an Italian thing, because even in the Calabrese, which my family is Calabrese, even in that, you say, well, we never forget. The grudges go on forever in terms of the family and all that stuff. So I think it's less fitting for Sicilian, but this pizza was very fitting for the movie because it's a Sicilian pizza. Now, in terms of this being like a true Sicilian pizza, here in upstate New York, it's a thing where you can't get the same style of Sicilian pizza that you would get in New York City. That usually is called a sfincione, and it's a nice, really thick crust that's topped with tomatoes and olive oil, Romano cheese, sometimes even a little bit of anchovy. Whereas here, this is clearly just square pizza in a pan. It's good, but it's not really what I would consider Sicilian pizza. But for the sake of talking about the movie, it is what it is. Primo Pizza, very good stuff. All right, back to the movie. Now, here's the thing about this movie that I think is the biggest problem in terms of my viewing of the movie. The costumes and makeup are the worst, I think, in pretty much any cinema. When you look at Michael Corleone, and the very first thing they show you in Coda, and I don't remember if it's in Godfather 3, but they show you this spiky hair, old Al Pacino from, he was 1989, so he's not as old as he is now. But if you think 35 years in the past, how could they have gotten Al Pacino so wrong in terms of what he looked like? It doesn't look anything like old Al Pacino does. He's got that stupid haircut. And even when it comes to the ending, it makes it even more stupid just looking at him like that. And even Connie's dresses and things that she wears look dumb. Having Vincent in the leather jacket, I know they make a plot point out of it, and he's supposed to be like your low-level hood, but it just is so on the nose and so kind of stupid. Also, I think makes it difficult to relate to the time period because everything that the people are wearing in there don't really set it to a certain time period. Whereas if you look at Godfather 2, the clothes Vito is wearing, you could totally see that as somebody in the early 1900s, wearing that kind of stuff, or even might be late 1800s. I guess I got to go back and look at the timing. But the makeup was a kind of stupid thing I thought about the movie for sure. And one of the biggest changes that I noticed in Coda versus 3 was that for the helicopter hit, which is kind of the big thing early on in the movie that kind of sparks the entire plot, during that, there were time periods where in the original cut of the movie, they would show reaction shots of people in the middle of that killing where, there was one where this guy's sitting there and he's got blood coming out of his mouth and he goes, "Joe Zaza, you son of a bitch." And it was one of those things where it was so ridiculous that I thought it was one of the funniest parts of the movie. The other thing I thought was a really funny part of the movie, which they kept in for Coda, is when Al Neri is on the train to the Vatican. He has the tin of cookies, and you see he's eating a cookie, and then he takes off the top, and there's a gun with bullets on the bottom. I thought that was a pretty funny visual. Also super on the nose, super silly, and I don't know. It's just fun. But them taking out the guy reacting during the helicopter hit, it was one of those things where I don't know why you would take that out, except for brevity. The other thing that happens is there was this theme that has been brought up in terms of oranges as a sign of death in the movie. If you look at the original Godfather and Godfather 2, anytime there's an orange on the screen, it means either death is coming or somebody's going to die or something to that effect. From what I understand, from special features on DVDs and things like that I've seen over the years, Francis Ford Coppola didn't intend that from the original movie. He was just using the oranges as something from the time period that would have been on a table to get a little color into the shots, which I could understand. But when it comes to Godfather 3, the orange actually definitely becomes, and this is where I was talking about pastiche earlier, it becomes something where he's kind of self-referencing himself. Because even during the helicopter hit, an orange kind of rolls off the table and you kind of, because of the rumbling of the helicopter flying overhead. So you get that whole thing. Michael Corleone is drinking orange juice the entire movie because he's diabetic and it gets him out of a diabetic shock. So the oranges, I think it hits it a little bit on the nose too. The characters in this movie are totally ridiculous. Don Altobello, we never hear about him at all in the original movies. So it's one of those things where even in television shows, a character doesn't become important until they become a character on the show. So here we are in the third movie, Don Altobello. He ends up being the big threat at the end of the movie. Not only siding with Joey Zaza, but also he hires Mosca at the end to kill Michael Corleone. And here's another place where I think this kind of hits on the postmodern. Early in the movie, every time you see Don Altobello, you kind of hear this spaghetti western Jaws harp that keeps coming on. And that's kind of a throwback to, I can't even place his name now. Who played Don Altobello in Godfather 3?
The character you were thinking of is Don Altobello, and he was played by Eli Wallach in the Godfather.
Eli Wallach, because he was in the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. So you get that kind of Jaws harp thing. Again, kind of a fun little thing there. When it comes to characters, though, there's two we need to talk about that are the most divisive part of the movie in terms of the general reception. Number one, Andy Garcia. Okay, he's Hispanic, whatever. James Caan wasn't Italian. We accepted him. I think Andy Garcia did a good enough job in the movie. I think where his character suffered was in the writing. They made him a little bit too oblivious. To me, it just made it less believable when he becomes the Don later on in the movie. Also, when he's giving direction at the opera, it makes it hard for you to take him as an authority like you did Pacino's character, where Pacino in Godfather 1 had the scene where, he kills McCluskey in the restaurant, the iconic scene. Andy Garcia didn't have anything like that, so it was kind of hard to get behind him as the next Don in the family, you know what I mean? But there was a bigger error in the movie, and it was Francis Ford Coppola casting his daughter Sofia Coppola as Mary. Now, I'm not going to pile on to how bad Sofia Coppola was in the movie because I think it's pretty well understood that she was definitely out of her element. It was supposed to be Winona Ryder, who came down with a mystery illness. Somehow, Johnny Depp is involved in her getting detached from the movie and them being in Italy and all this stuff. There's a whole history there. It's actually a pretty interesting story in terms of the making of The Godfather 3. But ultimately, Sofia Coppola ends up in the role. Her acting in the movie is completely flat. And I think even for Coda, I think they end up removing some of her scenes. Also, the whole incest thing with the cousins loving each other, it was hard to relate to that story as well. So I feel like she was kind of climbing uphill for that. Plus the nepotism stuff. It was never going to be easy to get around that for Francis Ford Coppola and Sofia Coppola. I give her a pass, though, because she made Lost in Translation, which is one of my favorite movies from the 2000s. We're going to cover that on this series here. Sofia Coppola was just a miss from the beginning. And at the ending, it was even hard to relate to her being killed because you get to that whole story of, okay, these cousins aren't supposed to be together, and then they're together, and then Andy Garcia kind of sends her off and says, we can't be together, you got to go. That ends up kind of precipitating into her getting shot by Mosca. And it was just a whole thing where you were never going to love this character just because of the circumstances and because she was in over her head and she knew she was in over her head. I give it a pass because I don't think this movie was supposed to be taken as seriously as the first two. It was definitely supposed to be a cash grab. So for what it is, I think it's fine. I'm not, like I said, I've restated everything that everybody else has said about her. I kind of just have no opinion about it. And I think that's fine. All right, I've skirted around it enough. The ending. To me, easily top 10, maybe top 5 funniest movie endings of all time. Just a sequence of events where they focus on Mary. She goes and she talks to Andy Garcia, who sends her away. They end up going outside of this opera house, the big stairs. When you see the big stairs, the way they shoot it, they kind of shoot it from a Dutch angle. You know something's going to go down there, kind of like the whole Untouchables vibe kind of thing. So she runs outside. There's a whole thing where the guy with the donkey, comes out. Then you have the whole distraction. Mosca takes a couple shots at Michael, and he misses Michael and hits Mary. There's a whole bunch of theatrics to it. You get the visual of Mary being hit. She says, "Dad," and she pretty much just the way I just said it. And she folds forward, and then Michael and Kay run to her. Michael picks her up, and she's lifeless, and he's, yelling. And then there's the silent scream. Easily, maybe even top 1 or 2 funniest moments in cinema history. The whole visual of Al Pacino with that stupid haircut, with his mouth open. And I guess what they were going for was he was so hurt by this happening that you didn't know, and the people in the scene didn't know, if the whole diabetes thing was happening in that moment. You kind of don't know what's happening until after whatever, it's got to be a good 15, 20 seconds of this silent scream that he's letting out. You see cuts of other people's reactions to him doing that. And even that, it's kind of hard to understand what exactly they're thinking. They show you Connie. They show you Andy Garcia's character, Vincent. They show you Kay. And Kay, her face changes. So I guess she, in the moment, has a little bit of sympathy for Michael, but the other 2 characters, it's hard to understand exactly what they're thinking. But as an audience member, like, we're supposed to have this feeling of, oh my God, this is so bad for Michael, but it's just, it's hard for me to get through that without laughing, and especially when he actually finally lets out the scream. Uh, it's a funny freaking moment, man. And also, kind of as a side to that, Cavalleria Rustica is a callback to Raging Bull. So again, going back to that whole postmodern pastiche type thing, I don't understand why, because even the Sopranos references the music that was played during the end of Godfather 3, which is the theme music to Raging Bull. What's the connection? Other than the New York City whatever, what exactly is the connection to Raging Bull and Godfather 3? I don't really get it, and I never understood that. But it's one of those things where it's like, okay, I hear the music, and in my head, I can't reconcile whether to think of Godfather 3, Raging Bull, or the Sopranos scene. It's toward the end of the 6th season where Silvio and Tony kind of do the little shadow boxing. So they're definitely referencing the Raging Bull part of it. But the fact that Godfather 3 uses it in a way where even the opera is named after that song, I just have to do a little bit more digging and kind of understand that as a cinema fan. But let's get to kind of my 2 final points on Godfather 3. So they both kind of relate to each other. Number 1 is Michael Corleone. Is he legitimate, or is he just a hood gangster? I think the movie is kind of confused about that too, because there's a scene early on. Vincent is talking to Michael. They're talking about Joey Zaza. And Vincent says something to the effect of, he's going around saying, fuck Michael Corleone, and we got to do something about it. And Michael has this moment where we never kind of see him in this character parody, whatever you want to call it, of like an actual gangster. And I don't understand, because this is kind of before Donnie Brasco and before Goodfellas, where that became a trope. But Michael says, let's say Joe Zaza is saying, fuck Michael Corleone. What do we do with a piece of shit like that? And he says it in a way where he's kind of like mocking the whole gangster thing. And that's not the Michael Corleone character. You almost never see him move into that kind of Italian-American thing. He's always kind of stoic in that sense. I don't really see him as, the hood gangster thing. And that's kind of why it's unexpected that A, he shoots the cop in the restaurant, and then B, he takes over Las Vegas. So I don't really get that. And it's kind of a funny thing for me. The quest is to become legitimate. You almost feel like he feels like a hood there for a second, or he feels like he has to get into that part of the character to relate to Vincent, I guess, but it just seems weird. And then the other theme of the movie is, can Michael Corleone be redeemed after the events of Godfather 2? Or is he just doomed? And this, I think, goes into a little bit of the original ending for Godfather 3 versus the Coda ending. In the original ending of Godfather 3, we see Michael lives a long life, he's back in Sicily, and he actually dies at the end of it. The audience gets the closure of Michael Corleone dying. I feel like Francis Ford Coppola made the right call at re-editing the movie into Coda to actually cut before Michael Corleone dies, because it kind of just goes to show the fact that redemption was never in the cards for Michael. No matter how much he wanted to pay his way into heaven and work with the Vatican in probably some illegitimate ways, he was never going to be redeemed for his earlier actions, and only got to suffer more and more. And the loss of his daughter was kind of the icing on top of the cake of, this guy is doomed. It's really not a happy ending. It's really not supposed to be. I think having the original ending to Godfather 3, where he dies in the end, you get the closure on the Corleone family, but you don't feel the weight of, these were really terrible people. And I think this kind of paved the way for, things like obviously The Sopranos, but Breaking Bad, where, you're rooting for these anti-heroes. I don't think all along you're supposed to be rooting for anybody, let alone Michael Corleone. You didn't want anything to happen to him, obviously, because you get attached to the characters, and family is a big part of the themes of Godfather. But he was kind of doomed from the start. Once he followed his father's footsteps into the mafia in illegitimate ways for the mafia, because you have a not made man going into business for the family, and then essentially becoming the boss of the family. That character was never going to have a happy ending. So I want to hear from you. Are you going to give Godfather 3 another shot? In terms of Godfather 3 and where you can find it, they've been on Pluto TV pretty much every day. And I've probably watched this movie in the last month between the 4K and Pluto TV, let's say a dozen times. But are you going to give it another shot? You almost can't find the original cut of Godfather 3. I think it actually is, if you get the Godfather set, I think there is a disc. Yeah. So this disc here is Godfather 3, not Coda, where it has the original ending and it's restored in the same way. But the version that you're going to find out there on streaming is the Coda version, not the original version. But are you going to give this movie another shot? Let me know. Be sure to subscribe and like the video if you enjoyed this. And comment down below if you have any films that you want to see me talk about into this kind of depth. I want to try to do a little bit more of this where it's more commentary, a little bit more laid back, kind of more of a podcast type thing, rather than just talk about food all the time. The older I get, the less I could eat, and the more I just want to enjoy. I've been having a lot of fun kind of revisiting old movies, and Godfather 3 is one of those. I hope you had a good time with this, and I'll see you in the next one.